In this video, we're going to look at pushing from IntelliJ to GitHub. Now, to be precise, we have done a push in the previous lecture, but that was a push of the entire project to GitHub, and we did obviously the entire contents of that project in the one go. But what about if we want to actually push a single file or a group of files, a few changes instead of a whole project? Because that's something that developers would probably be doing a lot more frequently than pushing the entire project. All right, so let's see how pushing of individual changes happens in IntelliJ. So I'm going to start IntelliJ first. And we're going to open the Blackjack project that we imported into GitHub in the previous video. And in fact, as you can see, it's opening automatically because of the way that I left it in the previous video. Okay. So at the moment we've got the Blackjack demo Python project imported and set up in GitHub. So let's make some changes to this so that we can detect a few changes and just push those changes up into GitHub. So I'm going to open this blackjack.py program first, and this is the main program, main Python script that actually runs the game. I'm just going to come down here and let's just create a bogus method right down the end. Actually, what we'll do, we'll create it up here. So we'll type def. We'll just call it Tim. We'll keep it really basic. And we'll print out a message. Tim says hello. The point we're trying to do here is very simply make a change to the script so that it's able to be pushed into GitHub. Right, I'll just make another line there to keep IntelliJ happy because there needs to be two lines between functions there. Okay, so that's one change we've made to the blackjack.py. So let's have a look at the project pane. I can do an Alt-1 to see the project pane. And let's actually create a separate file as well. So to do that, I'm just going to click on Blackjack, right click, click on New. I'm going to select Python file, and we'll just call this one Tim Test. Press enter, and I want you to see what happens when we do that. Anytime we create a new file now in this project, now that it has been set up with Git, we're going to be prompted as to whether we want to add this file that we're working on to Git. And you can come over here if you want to remember the option. You can click on the checkbox, for example, and click on yes, and that would mean that new files that we add in the future after this will automatically be added. And you can also do the opposite. You can click on the checkbox and click on no, in which case the files will never be added. I'm going to just click on yes to add this. And you may have noticed there that the Python script, timtest.py, was initially red and then it quickly changed to green. We're going to talk about those colors in a moment. Now the other thing to note though is if you decided not to include a file and then later you decide to include a file, you can come up to that file at any time, select it by clicking on the left mouse button, then right click, click on Git or select Git, the select Git menu, and click on Add. And you can see there's also a shortcut there, which on Windows is Control-Alt-A if you want to add that file at any time. So don't think that you're restricted and you can't add it once you've added it to the project. If you didn't add it to Git, you can do that at any time. All right, so at the moment we've made two changes. We've made a change to the existing script, the game script, and we've created a new Python script. So let's just open up this versioning window down the bottom. So click on, or version control I should say, View, Tools, Windows, and Version Control. And you can see the shortcut there to open it in the future. And let's have a look at this. We're going to open this up. And notice now that under default, we've got two files. We've got blackjack.py in blue, and timtest.py in green. Now the color coding blue means the file's been modified, so the file has changed since the last synchronization. That makes sense in this case because we have modified blackjack.py. Green means it's a new file to be added to the index, and again that also makes sense because we added timtest.py. So it's in green telling us that it's ready to be added to the repository once we do a commit. Bearing in mind we've only added the file at the moment, we haven't committed any changes. Another color is red here. So red would signify that the file isn't in version control, and that is consistent because we can right click that, select Git, click on Add. We can do that now. noting that that's changed to green now, which means that it's a new file in the sense that it's a file that's never been added to the Git repository, not necessarily a new file to the IntelliJ project, if that makes sense. But notice when I did that, that went green to indicate that it has been added, and when the next commit occurs, it's going to be going into the repository. But if you looked at that and decided and thought, well, hang on, I didn't mean to put that file in there, you right click, come down to Git, and you can click on Revert, and that brings up this menu here which has got the file that we've selected by default, but you can also add some other files if you wanted to. I'm just going to leave that first one clicked and click on Revert, and that changes it back to red and also removes it down here. So you can see that this is extremely useful, this version control pane down the bottom, to leave that open when you're looking at adding some version control, or when you're working, because you can see at a glance what's happening and what's changed. You can always turn it off with an Alt-9. You can do your normal work, and at any time, perhaps before you do a commit, you can do another Alt-9 and open it up, and you can see what's about to go through. So we can see here vcs.xml is unversioned, which is correct, it's in red, and the other two files which we talked about are ready to be added. Now there's a very useful link that I want to bring to your attention. So let's go and take a look at that. And it's at www.jetbrains.com, and I'll paste that link in. And what this is a list of file status highlights for version control within IntelliJ. So good link to bookmark, because you can come down here and you can see the ones that we looked at already. Blue, for example, file has changed since the last synchronization. Green, file is scheduled for addition to the repository. But there's also a lot of other colors as well. Brown, file exists locally but is not in the repository. So I think I said red there. If we have a look back in IntelliJ again, to me that looks red, but I think they mean brown. So we'll go with brown there, being that it's not in the repository. The red down here, which is more striking red, is during the last update, the file was merged with conflicts. We haven't seen a file with that color coding yet, because we haven't had a conflict, but you can see that there's quite a few different options there. File is deleted locally, for example, but not scheduled for deletion and still exists in the repository. Now some of these may or may not be appropriate for GitHub, because these are colors that IntelliJ use for all versioning control systems. They're mentioning CVS here instead of Git. The point is though, this is a good link to check out, to look at if you're ever wondering what a particular color is actually signifying. Okay, let's go back to IntelliJ. All right, so now that I'll just close the browser down as well, we don't need that anymore. So now that we've made a few changes, and actually I'll just put something in here. This is an empty file, just so we've actually got a file, something in that file. Okay, so we've got a very basic script there. Now, to actually look at committing these changes, we come up here and we'll click on this little VCS button. We've got this button in the toolbar, and notice that we've got the VCS pointing down, which indicates that would be like getting data from a repository. In this case, we want to push data to a repository. And you can see if I just hover over there, eventually it'll tell you that the shortcut is commit changes. So I'm going to click on that now, and that actually pops up this little window automatically. Now obviously this part down here you would probably recognize, which is the commit message, and I can put something like rise the two files, keep it simple. Up here we can see the files that are going to be included, and IntelliJ also helpfully shows you the files that aren't going to be included, to give you the opportunity, if you wanted to click on that, right click, and we could actually add it to version control if we wanted to. A little bit of a different option there than what we saw in the previous drop down over here in this menu, but we can still add it at this point in time if we wanted to on this screen, which is pretty handy. I'll close that down. So you'll get an overview depending on how many changes you've made of all the files that are ready to be committed. Now there's two options here. Commit by default is going to only commit to the local repository, but if we come down here we can see we've got a commit and push. So that would commit to the local repository and then push up to the remote repository, which in this case we've configured this project for GitHub. So I won't do that yet because we've got a couple of options on here, over here. Now reformat code, rearrange code, and optimize imports are IntelliJ specific things based on the programming language you're using. So in a nutshell, they enable you to reformat things like getting the correct indentation, spacing, etc. And optimize imports is another example where if you're using imports at the top of a file, they will optimize those so you haven't got any unused ones. So you might be wondering, well, why would they have that on a commit screen? But this is actually a good opportunity to be consistent anytime you commit data to a repository or files or artifacts to a repository, remembering that this code that you're committing may be used by other developers. Some companies that you might end up working for may have a policy, for example, that all code has to be working before being committed to a repository, or it also has to be reformatted and optimized to make sure that it adheres to a certain coding standard. So all these things down here are pretty much related for that or to that reason, to make sure that code is consistent and based on a sort of a certain format. And the other thing here, which we're going to leave this option clicked, perform code analysis. This enables you to look for particular warnings and errors and to try and get those addressed before you're committing code. So it makes sense to leave those options on normally. The other option up here is author. By default, it's going to use your local Git name, but if you wanted to, you can do a control space there. You can see we can select myself, double click, and put myself in there like so. Again, it's always a good idea when you're committing files to use the author name so that yourself or other developers know who's committed it. You can leave that blank, and I believe it gets used anyway when it's updated. But if you want to, just do a control space, as you saw me do, which would probably be command space on a Mac. But you could put your cursor in that field and just leave it there, and it will tell you what it is if there's nothing in there. All right, so in this case, we know which files are going to be added to the repository. We put a message in, which I know isn't strictly correct because we didn't revise two files. We created one and revised one, but we'll leave that as it is. But we'll come down here and do a commit and push. Since we want to do a two-stage, we want to commit it to the local repository and then send it off to the master, to the remote repository on GitHub. Now that perform analysis, it didn't do anything. Perform code analysis, that is language dependent, because on Java you'll most probably certainly get a pop-up that will appear, but in this case it's gone through okay. It hasn't found anything wrong with the code in the changes that in the files that we've sent through in this particular project for Python, so it's bypassed that screen altogether. But I'll just pop up this little screenshot here now showing you what that screenshot would look like, and that's actually from a Java project, just to give you an idea what it might look like when it actually pops up. Well, actually, to be strictly correct, that's from an Android Studio project, but I just wanted to give you a sense for what that screen may look like. And you can see you've got options there when that comes up. You can review the changes, or you can just go ahead and commit them. All right, but getting back to where we are now. So at this point, the changes have been committed to the local repository, and now we're going to be going off to the remote repository, in this case GitHub. And that's why we've got this second dialog, because you may not want to push, you might have decided to do a commit and push and then changed your mind and only left the changes in the local repository. And just as a confirmation though, this push commit is telling you that it's going to go from the master, it's got an arrow pointing right to origin:\master, which tells us it's going from the local repository, which the name is master by default, and it's going to the origin master, which in this case origin was what was defined in GitHub. So basically this means the push is going to go from the local master to origin master on GitHub. Always a good idea to just look at this to make sure that what you think is going to be happening is actually happening. And again, on the right hand side here, we've got all the artifacts that are going to be committed. Right, so let's click on push. You can see it's working away. And we've got the little green pop-up down the bottom there saying push successful, pushed one commit to origin/master. This is always helpful. You'll see this throughout the Git integration in IntelliJ. It will always pretty much always tell you whether what's happened with the particular status of a Git command and whether it's succeeded or if there's an error or what actually happened. So that's pretty cool. And of course, we can click on the console at any time to actually look at what's actually changed and what Git commands were invoked. And you can see in this case, we've got the various Git commands that were processed. If you scroll over, we can actually see the author. Again, that was overridden from the one that would normally be sent because I filled in that other field on that first commit screen. But we've also got the two files here, timtest.py, which stands for Python, and also the blackjack.py, because they were the two files that needed to go into the repository. And we've got two files changed, 6 insertions, and we've got this create mode for the new file there. So you can see that it's worked, and it's given us the overview as it always does right at the end. And clicking on log, You can see now we've got like a history, the initial commit for the Blackjack project that we did. You can see in this case, it was done a few days ago. Then the one we've just done now revised the 2 files. That's the new head because that's the latest commit that's gone through, and that's gone through literally a few minutes ago when we did it in this video. All right, so that's how we push our changes, make changes, push them, or we save them or commit them to the local repository, and then we've pushed it to the remote repository, which is on GitHub. So let's go over now to GitHub and make sure that those changes are showing. Now I'm going to come over back here to console and click on this link, which should open the browser and take us directly there. And I'm still logged in, or should still be logged in, which I am. All right, so you can see now we've got 2 commits. I can click on commit, the 2 commits, so you can see the revised the 2 files 5 minutes ago. Gives us a history there. And I can click on revise the 2 files. It's a pretty handy feature of GitHub. And you can see straight away, it actually shows us the changes. So in the blackjack.py script, it's showing it in green to signify these are the changes that were made to that particular file in this commit. And down the bottom, it's showing us timtest.py, which was a brand new file, which was also committed. That's pretty cool. All right, so there you go. We've now committed and we've now made some changes to our Python project. We've committed them to the local repository, and we've also pushed them to the remote repository on GitHub. All right, so let's finish the video here. In the next video, we're going to have a go at cloning a project from GitHub back into IntelliJ. So I'll see you in the next video.